What happens when one of the most successful pilots in history, in one of the most emblematic teams of motoring, feels that the car that leads does not respond? What if I told you that this 5th place in Canada was actually an overwhelming defeat, only that makeup? Stay, because what you are going to discover did not see on television. It all started in the iconic asphalt of Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve, a scenario loaded with history for Formula One. Canada, land of great deeds and unexpected mechanical betrayals, seemed to welcome Hamilton with the promise of a new beginning. It was Friday, the first day of activity on the track, and in the FP1, the SF-25 finally seemed to respond to what had been projected in Maranello: stability, competitive rhythm, and a platform that allowed Hamilton to show his talent. The stopwatch confirmed it. 13,620, only 0.427 seconds behind Max Verstappen, and ahead of pilots with supposedly more reliable machinery. It was a clear message, or that thought many: Ferrari was in the fight. But that reading was superficial. That time did not count everything. The track conditions were ideal, the asphalt still fresh, and the scattered traffic. The configuration chosen by Ferrari was conservative, with an intermediate aerodynamic load that favored the passage by curve, but sacrificed some straight speed. However, that choice had a very specific purpose: validate the simulator data, which had promised a perfect balance between traction and stability. And during that first session, the behavior of the car was consistent with the theory, at least on the outside. Behind the steering wheel, Hamilton was already beginning to notice the first indications of what would later be a constant during the weekend. Although the times were competitive, the car did not finish transmitting the confidence that a pilot needs to attack the pianos, stop to the limit, or accelerate precisely at the exit of the curves. The direction felt slightly disconnected in the changes of support, and the rear train had unpredictable reactions under weight transfer, especially in the braking areas that combined potholes and loss of aerodynamic load. But still, Ferrari decided to bet on aggressive changes for FP2. And that's where everything was twisted. What was expected to be a step forward turned out to be a disturbing setback. Although the car was adjusted between sessions with the hope of improving behavior in slow sections and means, the result was a loud fall in relative performance. Hamilton finished 8th with a time of 1:12,653, more than half a second behind the leader George Russell, who marked the rhythm with a much more predictable Mercedes. That drop in performance was not due to external factors such as climate, pilot errors, or drastic changes on the track. It was the exclusive product of the internal adjustments that Ferrari introduced, believing that they optimized the rear axle load and corrected the braking imbalance. For Hamilton, this was a bitter déjà. In Mercedes, I had already experienced seasons where simulator data did not coincide with reality. But now, in Ferrari, the pattern was repeated with more intensity. And what is worse, with less margin of adaptation. The SF-25 did not respond to the modifications logically. What in theory was a gain became a tangible loss of trust, time, and track efficiency. The car seemed to have its own life, and not one that favored the aggressive and intuitive piloting that has characterized the British throughout his career. From the outside, the image was a relative tranquility. A top 5 in the general, a constant presence in the high middle part of the table. But that perception could not be further from reality. What had begun as an illusion of competitiveness was actually the prelude to an uncomfortable revelation. Ferrari remained a prisoner of his own technical approach, unable to translate the hours of simulator into real sensations on the track. And for Hamilton, that distance between what promises the theory and what allows practice was slowly becoming a recurring nightmare. I thought the car was faster, but we ended up going slower. It's not just a phrase when passing. It is a silent cry of a pilot who does not understand why what he feels on the track completely contradicts what he sees in the data sheets. And most worrying, this phrase was not exclusive to the Canada Grand Prix. It is a persistent echo that Lewis Hamilton has been repeating since the 2025 season began with Ferrari. A phrase that, if analyzed carefully, naked one of the worst situations that a Formula One pilot can live: the total loss of confidence in the tool with which it must compete to the limit. The disconnection that Hamilton faced in Canada was not the product of an isolated day. It is the result of a technical pattern that Ferrari still fails to decipher. The SF-25 is designed with an aerodynamic and mechanical philosophy that, on paper, seeks to maximize performance through a balanced distribution of aerodynamic load between the axis and a pull-rod rear suspension for greater efficiency of the air flow under the diffuser. In theory, this should translate into a predictable, stable, and highly receptive platform to fine adjustments. But practice has shown otherwise. During each lap, Hamilton not only fights against his rivals, but against a car that gives him contradictory signs. Sometimes the car enters a curve, but unexpectedly loses adherence at the exit. Other times, it slows stable in a straight line, but becomes ungovernable in combined braking with direction. It is as if the car had multiple personalities and none of them were aligned with what the pilot needs to extract the maximum potential. In Formula One, this type of erratic behavior is devastating for the pilot's confidence. And when that pilot is Lewis Hamilton, someone who has built his success on almost telepathic communication with his cars, the psychological impact is even deeper. The root of the problem seems to be in the inability of the team to correctly correlate the simulator data and wind tunnel with the real behavior on the track. That is, what works in virtual environments does not translate into the physical world. And this not only affects pure performance, but also the coherence in decision-making. Ferrari adjusts the height of the car waiting for greater rear load, but the result is overwhelming. They modify the rigidity of the suspension looking for more traction, and end up with rebounds that affect the braking. It is a loop of settings and errors where each attempt to improve becomes a new source of problems. And Hamilton is not the only one who notices. Charles Leclerc has also expressed on different occasions that the car reacts unexpectedly in medium-speed curves and that it is especially difficult to maintain a constant rhythm in long batches. But there is a key difference. Hamilton, being new in Ferrari, does not have the historical context of the car. He does not come customary. He compares to what he has lived in Mercedes, and that aggravates frustration. Each correlation failure is not just a technical failure, it is a betrayal of the basic understanding between pilot and machine. What began as a suspicion in the first race of the season was confirmed in Canada. The SF-25 is not a balanced car or consistent, much less predictable. It is, for many engineers inside and outside Ferrari, one of the most frustrating cars of recent times in terms of correlation between design and functionality. The causes of their erratic behavior are deeply rooted in technical decisions that, although they sought to innovate and step forward with respect to SF-24, ended up building an unstable monster disconnected from their own logic. Another critical aspect is the lack of SF-25 sensitivity to adjustment changes. The car does not respond linearly to the adjustments. When the front wing angle is modified, the reaction is not progressive, but discontinuous. The same goes for the differential or brake balance. This forces engineers to work blindly in many ways, because the data does not reflect the experience of the pilot on the track. Telemetry can indicate a stability gain, but the pilot feels otherwise. This divorce between science and sensation is what has most baffled Lewis Hamilton, and what generates more insecurity in the technical team. The SF-25 has also revealed traction problems in the exit of slow curves, especially on tracks with little adherent asphalt such as Canada. This is a direct consequence of the aerodynamic commitment in the rear area, which is aggravated when the car changes high due to the weight of the fuel or by rebounds when passing over pianos. Hamilton, accustomed to cars with a solid mechanical base like the Mercedes of its golden years, is now with a car that does not give it clear signs of what to expect in each section of track. Each curve is a lottery. Each lap is uncertainty. And while other teams such as McLaren and Mercedes have achieved a clear line of evolution where each new update generates tangible improvements, Ferrari seems to be trapped in a regression loop. Each solution implemented generates new problems. Each attempt to improve traction worsens aerodynamic balance. Each change in the height of the car to correct the porpoising, unbalance the passage by curve. It is a vicious circle that feeds on its own inefficiency. The technical collapse of the SF-25, therefore, is not a specific event. It is the cumulative result of bad conceptual decisions, an inconsistent execution, and a structural inability to understand the car they have built. It is the price that is paid for wanting to innovate without consolidating. And it is ultimately the reason why Lewis Hamilton is caught in a car that, for now, does not allow him to fight even his direct rivals, much less for the championship. What has lived by Lewis Hamilton in the classification of the Canada Grand Prix should not be interpreted as an isolated stumble or an unfortunate day. On the contrary, it is a precise radiography of the structural situation in which Ferrari is found. For years, the Scuderia has lived with the pressure of being the historical reference of Formula One, and at the same time has suffered the anguish of not being able to materialize that legacy in concrete results. With the arrival of Hamilton, many believed that the talent of the most laureate pilot of the modern era would suffice to reverse a decadent trend. But reality has been relentless. What fifth in the timetable does not show is the hidden price of that position. The huge effort that required to keep the car on the track, the frustration of a pilot that every weekend must negotiate with an unpredictable car, and the impotence of a team that does not find answers either in the wind tunnel or in the simulator or in the track data. What it seems is not. And that sustained illusion with statistics and diplomatic statements only postpones the inevitable. Ferrari needs a radical transformation, not a simple aerodynamic update. Hamilton, meanwhile, is not a pilot who asks with competing. It is a competitor who demands excellence, who has gained world in contexts of maximum technical and emotional demand. He did not come to Ferrari to build a nostalgic narrative or play a symbolic role. He came to win. And if something was clear in Canada is that, while the SF-25 continued to operate as a machine without soul or coherence, that goal is not only distant, but can become unattainable. Lewis Hamilton does not need to adapt anymore. He has fulfilled his part. He has changed his pilot style, has offered all his experience, and has demonstrated, even with a defective car, which he can still fight in the elite. Now is Ferrari who must answer. And you must do it not with promises or statements, but with real solutions. Because in this category, the difference between success and disaster does not mark a quick lap. It marks the ability to correct in time. And the clock for Ferrari already started running.